With only one episode left, Hawkeye is building itself up for one spectacular Christmas. This is my spoiler review of Hawkeye Episode 5, Ronin. After their fallout last week, Clint and Kate go their separate ways, with the latter ready to abandon her dream of becoming a hero, and Clint ready to embrace his past instead of running from it until a startling discovery comes up. Now, before I probably start with my review for this week's Hawkeye, I want to know your thoughts on the show this far, on this episode. How do you rank the episodes thus far? And spoiler warning for this week's episode, so do watch it before watching this video. And speaking of MCU, I have a spoiler-free review for Spider-Man No Way Home right up here, so you can click on that if you want to check that out. Enjoying that conversation. And of course, if you like movies and TV, this is a place to be, so consider clicking that subscribe button and you won't miss any future conversation about your favorite movies and TV. And of course, we cover Hawkeye every week, so make sure you join us for that. This week's cold open is one of the many reasons why this is probably my favorite episode of the show. Everything just flows in this one. Everything connects seamlessly and organically. And with that cold open, we go into where Yelena has been, what she's been doing, as she was keeping on with the mission of saving Black Widows around the world in 2018. And she tries to save someone, and that someone apparently was not brainwashed. So Yelena is ready to move on to the next Black Widow, as she herself in this one is joined by a Black Widow that I don't think we saw in the movie, but I'm sure you guys will correct me if I'm mistaken. And once again, we can see that Hawkeye can do great action, and this is not the only time in this episode where we'll see great action. So after a little bit of catch up, Yelena steps into the bathroom and she's blipped. And every time these MCU shows have shown us what happens in the blip, how people who were blipped and then came back, how they got reacquainted with the world per se, it's always very effective. It's always very compelling, and it's rich with drama. So Yelena just comes back in the same place. The walls are different. She doesn't recognize the people there at first, but then her friend is still there and all. And obviously she doesn't know what has happened, and she doesn't know what has happened to her sister. Following that, we had the Marvel intro, which is nice, but then we have the recap from last week, which I felt, especially because the episode begins with the Yelena backstory, you should have just gotten the recap at first. So it felt a little bit weird. And I really like the bulk of this episode because we focus on Kate as she's disheartened by her decision, and we get a really cool conversation with her mom that from the very beginning felt weird. As Kate confesses to her mom what has been going on, what she found out about Jack and whatnot, her reaction feels entirely weird. So when Jack eventually is arrested, I think all those tax issues that apparently the police found on him, the Sloan Shell Company and whatnot, that's all Eleanor's. And she's just putting the blame on Jack since Kate believes it is Jack's fault. Last week I called it, and if you guys saw last week's review, you know I called it. She is the actual bad guy. Jack is just a caricature in this whole thing. And the rest of the episode is really two things. It's the Kate part of the story and it's the Clint part of the story until we converge. So I just want to take care of the Kate part of the story first, because she goes back to her place and Yelena is there. And what I like about this conversation, as they confront each other about what Yelena is doing here, and does Kate really know Clint Barton? To me, this whole thing is these two different ideologies at odds with each other, as they're around the same age. And with Yelena having blipped, maybe Kate is older at this point. And when these two are talking, the conversation is extremely interesting, because we have someone in Kate who's very hopeful, very naive, very excitable about this whole superhero life, and that trusts people. She's open to trusting people and believing in heroes, while Yelena is more of a cynic. She's more of a Black Widow. And Yelena, interestingly enough, is much more similar to what Clint is like. And this whole thing really unveils a lot of interesting aspects about both characters. And in that sense, I found the conversation extremely entertaining. And the acting is wonderful, both on Florence Pugh and Hailee Steinfeld's part. I particularly love how Kate at first is trying to act all tough and whatnot, and Yelena is just laughing at her. Oh, sure, you almost killed me. That's funny. I really like that. But we can also see that Yelena is very human. She makes mac and cheese. She's trying to laugh. She wants to visit New York and whatnot. And what this ends up as Yelena leaves, the hanging thread that they leave is who hired Yelena. We know she's after Clint for personal reasons because we saw the post-credit scene in Black Widow, so I don't know how that connects to the eventual reveal at the end of the episode, but once more showing the humanity of Yelena. We do see her later out of her own initiative going to investigate who hired her. So now the Clint part of the story before we talk about how they converge. I love what they do with Clint in this. He's in a very dark place. The tension of this whole mess with Kate, the tracksuit mafia, his past as Ronin, not being able to make it home for Christmas, the pressure his wife is inadvertently putting on him because he knows he's disappointing her, even though she's the best wife ever, man, because she's supporting the dude through thick and thin, much like they probably promised when they got married. I particularly love the moment where Clint goes to talk to the mural where you have the Avengers names from the Battle of New York as he's ready to step into that darkness. And in this meeting with Maya is where we have Clint fully embracing his past as he meets her as Ronin. He takes care of the entire tracksuit mafia one by one and eventually gets to Maya. And once more, Hawkeye proves that they can do great action. This is the action I am looking for. Stellar use of stunts, camera work, we can see everything, beautiful wides, static, allows us to see the work that was put into this. And Clint does quick work of Maya only to show her that if he wanted to kill her, he could. This whole confrontation from Clint's point of view is really just to say, leave me the fuck alone or I will kill you. And I think that's really great storytelling, as this whole thing so far, this whole story has been Clint trying to avoid the confrontation. And essentially it's because he knows he'll win. This show has really done a great job at exploring Clint as a human and seeing what he has gone through has affected him up to this point. And right now, at this moment, he knows he's the monster. He knows he's the boogeyman for this person. So he's just asking to be left alone. Because a monster for someone else, he's also a father for other people. He's also a husband. And that's what he wants to be. He wants to leave the monster behind. But in a display of humanity, much like we had Yelena displaying her humanity for Kate, we have Clint telling the truth to Maya about what happened that night when he killed her father. He was tipped off by an informant who was working for the big man upstairs, for the uncle, for the big boss. And these moments, how we have these confrontations throughout these episodes and how they parallel one another in this one, they're what give this show a little bit more of gravitas. They're what gives this show that extra depth when we get to see the humanity of these characters and them displaying it towards their supposed enemies. But as he tells this to Maya, she plays dirty, she trips Clint and is ready to kill him, but Kate is there, so Maya just walks off. And Clint and Kate reunite once more, and they go back to the place. There's Lucky, they're playing with Lucky, and Yelena follows Kate's mother. For some reason, at the time, we don't know what it is, and we find out that it was Kate's mother who hired Yelena to kill Clint. So I don't know what the connection is between Val and Eleanor. Maybe they belong to a super group of evil masterminds. Maybe they're the masters of evil. Who knows? That'd be pretty cool, I think. And not only do we find out that Eleanor hired Yelena to kill Clint, but also that Eleanor went up to meet with the big man, with Uncle Kingpin. Vincent D'Onofrio is here as Kate is shocked by this message and shows Clint, hey, who's this guy? my mom is meeting. And Clint just says it. Oh, that's the guy I was afraid of. That's Kingpin. And we close out on the shot of Kingpin, played by Vincent D'Onofrio and Eleanor Bishop. Phenomenal stinger. Hawkeye clearly can do great endings. It just didn't do one for the midpoint, sadly. But every ending, like in general, has been really memorable, changing the status quo, elevating the stakes, and they gave us something really rich and compelling for both Kate and Clint in this episode, not necessarily as a duo, but as individuals, going on their own paths and growing through this adventure, and through the confrontations and interactions they have with the rest of the people involved in this whole mess. They left me very excited for the finale, which I think is always the job of an episode leading into another. So I cannot wait to finally see Kingpin next week. It's great to have this confirmation along with some other stuff that we've seen this week on MCU things. But I'll leave that to a certain spoiler review coming later in the week. But those are my thoughts on Hawkeye. This really is, I think, my favorite episode. It's either this one or 3, but I think I prefer this one because the emotion is much higher on this, because we're finally converging it all, we're finally connecting it all, and it feels like organically every thread feeds into one another. But I want to know your thoughts on this week's Hawkeye. Anything and everything, drop them down there in the comments below. Start the conversation, because it's always the most important part, and I cannot wait to talk about the finale next week. Don't forget, there's a Spider-Man No Way Home spoiler-free review right now up on the channel, and soon enough I'll have a Spider-Man movie ranking, I'll have a Spider-Man No Way Home spoiler review, and I'll have a post-credit scene explained along with a spoiler live talk on Saturday. I hope to see you in all those. I hope to see you in this review down there and next week on the finale. Thank you so much once more, and until the next one, love each other and love the movies.